Have you ever wondered what really happens when we die? It's one of humanity's oldest questions, a mystery that every culture, every religion, and every individual has wrestled with at some point. Some say death is the end, others believe it's a doorway, and some traditions even map out the journey step by step. Imagine if there was an ancient book that claimed to guide us through this final passage. A book so mysterious, so detailed, that it not only describes death, but also explains what happens in the moments and stages that follow. That book exists. It's known as the Bardo Thodol, often called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's not a spooky tale or a piece of fantasy literature. It's a sacred text that has influenced spiritual seekers, philosophers, and even psychologists for centuries. And in today's video, we're going to explore it in depth. We'll uncover the story of Padmasambhava, the legendary figure credited with bringing this knowledge to the world. Then, we'll dive into the 3 stages of the Bardo Thodol, stages that describe in remarkable detail what a soul supposedly experiences after death. Whether you take it as literal truth, symbolic wisdom, or simply a cultural masterpiece, you'll walk away with a deeper understanding of how humans across time have tried to answer life's biggest question: what happens when we die? So, stay with me until the end, because this is not just about death. It's about life, meaning, and the incredible mystery of consciousness itself. The Bardo Thodol is not your typical ancient text. Unlike the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which was placed in tombs to help guide the deceased, this Tibetan book is actually read aloud to the dying or recently deceased person. The idea is that hearing these words can help them navigate the strange and often overwhelming journey after death. Now, this might sound otherworldly, maybe even unbelievable. But here's the fascinating part: modern science has found that hearing is one of the last senses to fade at the time of death. This means that the practice of reading sacred instructions aloud to someone who has just passed may not be as mystical as it sounds. It could be deeply practical. But who created this text? And how did it become such a central part of Tibetan spirituality? To answer that, we need to travel back more than 1,000 years to the story of a remarkable figure, someone surrounded by legends, miracles, and wisdom: Padmasambhava. To understand the mysterious book that explains what happens when we die, we first need to meet the man behind its wisdom, Padmasambhava, a figure so legendary that history, myth, and spirituality all blend together in his story. Padmasambhava, whose name means born from the lotus, is sometimes called the second Buddha because of the transformative role he played in bringing Buddhism to Tibet. While the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, lived in India around 500 BCE, Padmasambhava's life unfolded in the 8th century CE. Over 1,000 years later. But his influence on Tibetan culture and spirituality is so profound that many consider him equally important. According to legend, Padmasambhava wasn't born in the usual way. The story goes that he appeared as an 8-year-old child sitting on a lotus in the middle of a lake. Imagine the scene: a serene, sparkling body of water, a giant lotus in full bloom, and at its center, a radiant child with an aura of wisdom and calm. This miraculous birth wasn't just symbolic, it sent a message. It suggested that Padmasambhava was no ordinary human being, but a being of higher realization, sent into the world with a purpose. From the very beginning, his life carried an air of the mysterious and the divine. As Padmasambhava grew, his reputation spread. He was known for his vast knowledge of meditation, his mastery of esoteric teachings, and, most strikingly, his ability to transform negative forces. Tibetan accounts describe him as someone who could subdue demons, not in the Hollywood sense of exorcisms and horror, but in a symbolic way. These demons often represented inner struggles like fear, anger, or ignorance, as well as the natural chaotic energies of the world. When he entered Tibet, Buddhism had already been introduced but was facing huge resistance. Many people still followed older shamanic traditions that involved spirits, rituals, and gods of the natural world. Instead of dismissing these traditions, Padmasambhava did something brilliant: he integrated them. He is said to have tamed the local deities, transforming them into protectors of the Buddhist path. This not only won the trust of the Tibetan people, but also created a unique spiritual landscape where Buddhism and indigenous beliefs could coexist. One of Padmasambhava's most fascinating contributions was his teaching about death and the afterlife. In Tibetan culture, death was never viewed as a simple end. It was seen as a transition, a passage into another state of being. But this passage was believed to be full of challenges, illusions, and opportunities. Padmasambhava gave detailed instructions for this journey, teachings that would later be compiled into the Bardo Thodol. The word Bardo means between state, and Thodol means liberation through hearing. Together, it suggests a freedom by hearing during the transitional state. This is where his brilliance shows. He understood that at the time of death, when the physical body is gone, the consciousness may still be open to guidance. Words spoken by the living could act as a compass, helping the departed soul recognize what is happening and avoid confusion or fear. Here's where the story gets even more mysterious. According to tradition, Padmasambhava didn't just teach openly. He also hid teachings throughout the Himalayan region, literally concealing scrolls, texts, or even objects in caves, mountains, or lakes. These hidden treasures were called terma, and they were said to be discovered later by special individuals known as tertanens, or treasure revealers. The Bardo Thodol is believed to be one of these terma. The story goes that Padmasambhava dictated the text to one of his closest disciples, Yeshi Sogyal, who wrote it down and concealed it until the time was right for it to be revealed. Centuries later, a Tertan rediscovered it, and it spread across Tibet as a guide for death and rebirth. This idea, that teachings could be hidden for future generations when they were most needed, adds a layer of mystery to the text. It suggests that the Bardo Thodol wasn't just a book for its time, but a timeless guide meant to serve humanity in cycles. Now, you might be wondering, was Padmasambhava really a miracle-working, Lotus-Born being? Or was he a brilliant teacher whose life became wrapped in myth over the centuries? Historians often describe him as a master of Tantric Buddhism, a system that uses rituals, symbols, and meditation to transform the mind. His ability to integrate different traditions, to work with people's fears and hopes, and to offer practical tools for facing death. These alone would make him legendary. Whether or not every miracle story is literally true, what's clear is that his influence reshaped Tibet and gave the world one of its most fascinating spiritual texts. Even today, more than 1,000 years later, Padmasambhava is revered across Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, and beyond. Statues of him can be found on mountaintops, in monasteries, and in temples, often showing him seated in a relaxed but commanding posture, holding a Vajra, symbol of spiritual power, in one hand and a skull cup in the other. His gaze is direct, as if reminding us that death, life, and enlightenment are all part of the same reality. And it's his teachings on death that bring us back to the Bardo Thodol. This text, connected to his wisdom, is structured around a remarkable idea that the moments after death are not random, not chaotic, but stages of experience that can be recognized and navigated. These stages, called the three Bardos, form the heart of the book, and they are what we'll explore next. When Padmasambhava's teachings were finally compiled into the Bardo Thodol, the text laid out a journey that begins at the very instant of death. The first stage, known as the Chakai Bardo, is often described as the Bardo of the moment of death. This is where everything changes. The breath stops, the body begins to shut down. But according to the Bardo Thodol, consciousness doesn't immediately vanish. Instead, it enters a remarkable state, one filled with both danger and opportunity. The very first thing described in this Bardo is the appearance of what's called the clear light of ultimate reality. Imagine it as a vast, brilliant radiance, limitless, boundless, and pure. For the average person, this light can be overwhelming, even blinding. But the teachings insist that this clear light is actually the true nature of mind itself. In other words, it's not something external, it's who we really are beneath all our thoughts, fears, and identities. Here's the fascinating part: if the dying person can recognize this clear light, they can achieve liberation instantly. In Tibetan tradition, this is the ultimate opportunity, the moment when the soul realizes its own pure essence and merges with it. No more rebirth, no more wandering, just freedom. But as inspiring as this sounds, the text also acknowledges something important: most people don't recognize it. Why? Because we're so conditioned by our lives, our attachments, our fears, and our habits that when confronted with something so vast and unfamiliar, we recoil. Instead of surrendering to the light, we turn away. This is where the role of the living comes in. The Bardo Thodol was written to be read aloud to the dying or recently deceased. In this first stage, the voice of a loved one or a lama would gently remind the soul, do not be afraid. This is the clear light. Recognize it. Embrace it. The idea was that hearing these words could help the consciousness avoid panic and realize the truth. Even today, this practice continues in Tibetan Buddhist rituals, blending compassion with deep spiritual insight. Now, let's pause for a second. You might be thinking this sounds mystical, but does it have any connection to what we know scientifically? Interestingly, modern studies of near-death experiences often describe something strikingly similar: a sense of moving into a bright light, feelings of peace, expansion, or unity. Of course, Science doesn't say this proves the Bardo Thodol is literally true, but it does show that across cultures, people report remarkably similar visions at the edge of death. Whether this is the brain shutting down or a glimpse of consciousness beyond the body remains one of life's great mysteries. So, the first stage of the Bardo Thodol isn't about punishment or reward. It's about recognition. It says that in the very moment of death, every soul is offered the chance to see its true nature. It's like the universe whispering, "You are more than this body. You are infinite light." But because recognition is rare, most souls move past this stage, entering the second Bardo, an even more dramatic and often frightening landscape, filled with visions of deities, illusions, and the projections of the mind. And that after the brilliant clear light of the first Bardo fades, the consciousness enters a new phase. This is called the Chonayad Bardo, the Bardo of experiencing reality. And this is where things get far more vivid, complex, and at times, terrifying. According to the Bardo Thodol, this stage unfolds over several days after death. Instead of the pure, formless light of the first Bardo, the soul now encounters visions, shifting landscapes, radiant beings, and at times frightening apparitions. But here's the key: the text insists that all of these visions are not external realities, but projections of the mind itself. The journey begins with encounters with peaceful deities. These figures appear radiant, serene, and filled with compassion. Some are described in Buddhist iconography, like Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of compassion, or luminous Buddhas radiating light in every direction. Imagine being surrounded by beings of light, each offering wisdom, comfort, and the chance for liberation. According to the text, this is another opening. If the soul can recognize these beings as reflections of its own true nature, liberation is possible even here. But as before, the challenge is recognition. The departed consciousness, confused and unsettled, often fails to realize that these dazzling visions are part of its own mind. Instead of merging with them, it may cling, fear, or turn away. Then comes the next stage: the appearance of wrathful deities. These figures are described as fierce, terrifying, sometimes monstrous. They carry weapons, roar with thunderous voices, and appear covered in flames or surrounded by skulls. At first glance, this sounds like a descent into hell. But the Bardo Thodol is very clear: these wrathful deities are not demons waiting to punish the soul. They are simply the flip side of the peaceful deities, the same enlightened energy appearing in a fierce form. Think of it this way: sometimes compassion appears gentle, like a comforting embrace. Other times it appears fierce, like a parent scolding a child to stop them from making a dangerous mistake. The wrathful deities are symbolic of this fierce compassion, shaking the soul awake, urging it to recognize reality. Here's where the Bardo Thodol feels incredibly modern. It teaches that all these visions, peaceful and wrathful, are projections of the mind. They are reflections of the soul's own inner states, desires, fears, anger, love, wisdom, confusion. In this way, the text isn't just about what happens after death. It's also a mirror for life itself. Don't we already experience peaceful and wrathful deities every day? When we're calm and centered, the world feels luminous. When we're angry, anxious, or afraid, the world feels threatening. The Bardo, in a sense, is a magnified version of the mind's ordinary states. Interestingly, near-death experiences often include encounters with beings of light, spiritual guides, or even frightening presences. Some people describe meeting compassionate figures who guide them, while others recount shadowy, fearsome forms. Whether these are hallucinations, spiritual realities, or psychological projections, the parallels with the Bardo Thodol are striking. In the second Bardo, the soul is essentially being tested. Can it recognize that all these dazzling or terrifying forms are just its own mind playing out in vivid imagery? If yes, liberation is possible. If not, confusion deepens and the journey continues. The teachings encourage the soul, through the voice of the living, to stay calm and fearless. When peaceful deities appear, embrace them. When wrathful deities appear, do not run away. See them as expressions of your own mind. Every encounter is a chance for freedom. But if fear takes over, if the soul mistakes these visions for external enemies, it becomes trapped in the illusions, pulled deeper into the cycles of attachment and aversion, and this leads to the third Bardo. The Chonayad Bardo is perhaps the most dramatic and colorful stage of the journey. It reveals both the beauty and terror of the mind, showing us how our inner world shapes our experience of reality. But the journey isn't over yet. For those who cannot recognize the peaceful and wrathful deities as their own projections, the consciousness moves into the third Bardo, a stage that feels closer to the world of the living, and one that ultimately decides what comes next. After the dazzling light of the first Bardo and the overwhelming visions of the second, the journey of the soul enters its final stage, the Sidpa Bardo, often called the Bardo of Becoming. This stage is closer to the world of the living. Here, the soul is no longer confronted by cosmic light or fierce deities, but begins to feel the pull of karma, the deep currents of past actions, thoughts, and habits. If the earlier Bardos were like wandering through a dream, this stage feels more like being swept toward a destination. And that destination is rebirth. In this Bardo, the consciousness feels itself drifting, restless, and searching. The text describes it as being blown by winds, carried from place to place, almost like a leaf caught in a storm. The soul may glimpse different realms of existence, heavenly worlds, human lives, animal forms, or even darker, more painful realms. Each vision is not random. It reflects the soul's own tendencies and choices made in life. The Bardo Thodol explains that the energy of karma acts like a magnet, drawing the consciousness toward a new form of existence that matches its inner state. One of the most vivid parts of the Sidpa Bardo is the description of how rebirth begins. The soul, caught in the pull of karma, eventually encounters a vision of future parents. The text says that the attraction to them is not always conscious. It arises from karmic connections and unresolved attachments. For example, if someone has strong attachments to love, desire, or family, those emotions may pull them toward a certain kind of rebirth. If anger and hatred dominate, that energy may lead them elsewhere. In this sense, rebirth is not a reward or punishment, but a reflection, mirror of the patterns carried within the mind. Even here, at the threshold of a new life, the Bardo Thodol insists there is still hope. The soul can recognize what is happening, let go of attachments, and choose liberation instead of rebirth. The voice of the guide continues to remind, do not be swept away. Recognize these visions as illusions. You still have the chance for freedom. But, just as in the earlier stages, this recognition is difficult. The pull of habit, desire, and fear is strong. Most souls, the text explains, do not escape this cycle and instead enter into a new life, continuing the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. What's striking about this third Bardo is how much it mirrors the struggles of life. Don't we all, in a way, feel swept by currents of habit, carried along by forces we don't fully control? Our choices, our attachments, our unresolved emotions, they shape where we end up. The Sidpa Bardo shows this in a heightened, symbolic way. It tells us that death does not erase our patterns, it amplifies them. And unless we become aware, we are drawn to repeat them again and again. Now, whether you believe in literal rebirth or not, the symbolism here is powerful. The third Bardo teaches us that our actions and states of mind have consequences that ripple beyond a single moment. It asks us, what patterns are you cultivating in your life right now? Because if we are driven by fear and anger now, those forces will continue to shape us, whether in this life, at death, or beyond. Seen this way, the Bardo Thodol isn't just a guide for the dead. It's also a guide for the living, a reminder that the choices we make today prepare us for the journeys of tomorrow. And so, the Sidpa Bardo completes the three-stage journey. From the radiant clear light, to the visions of deities, to the pull of rebirth, the soul has been given chance after chance to awaken. Liberation is possible at every step, but so is confusion. For most souls, the cycle continues. A new life begins. The wheel of existence turns once more. But for those rare few who recognize the truth, the journey ends in freedom. In the end, the mysterious book doesn't just explain what happens when we die. It reminds us how to live with awareness, to face our fears, and to recognize that beyond all illusions, there is light. So maybe the real secret of the Bardo Thodol is this is not the opposite of life. It's part of the journey. And by understanding death, we can live more fully, more fearlessly, and more awake. So I'll leave you with this question. If you knew that life itself was a kind of Bardo, a transition, how would you live differently today?